In this presentation, we'll define primary research and discuss different methods of data collection. For Essay 3, you'll need to apply at least 2 of the 4 methods we'll be discussing. Primary research involves collecting support for your claims firsthand. This means that the researcher hasn't looked to another published source that has completed research to back up what he or she believes. That's what a secondary source is. No, primary research means the researcher goes out into the field, whatever that may be, and investigates for him or herself. This information can appear in different forms, whether data tables or works of art. What makes something primary research is that the investigator has collected and analyzed it directly. There are 4 methods of primary research we'll be discussing: interviews, surveys, field reports, also known as observational reports, and texts. Interviews are a common primary research method. They provide an opportunity to share with your audience an intimate look at the subject population because interviews are personal. They are structured by a question and answer format, but skilled interviewers know how to make their interview feel more like a conversation than a list of questions. Usually, a researcher selects someone to interview for one or more of the following reasons. The person interviewed has relevant first-hand experience. Perhaps they attended an event, witnessed an incident, etc. The person interviewed is an expert on a given subject, or the person interviewed is somehow representative of a particular point of view. Perhaps the subject population or a segment of the population that thinks a particular way. For instance, consider how Diane Chang represents the new wave of food enthusiasts called foodies. Though she's only one person, Michael Idov suggests she's one among many thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of young people who pursue food as a hobby. However, interviewers might also be an opportunity to help readers understand an atypical perspective. When arranging an interview, there's definitely a few things you should have in mind. How will you conduct the interview? Face-to-face? By phone or email? Will the interview subject allow me to record the interview? You should always ask permission before making a recording. Be sure to at least document the questions you asked so that way your research method can be evaluated by a research supervisor or your peers. Like interviews, surveys allow for the researcher to engage people through questions, but surveys work on a massive scale because they involve pooling responses from many individuals, whereas the interview is limited to a single person. The more people you get responses from, the more likely your audience will accept the information gathered as meaningful. For research professionals, 30 people is the minimum for surveys, but for our class, the minimum will be 10. Another key difference between an interview and survey is the way questions are asked. We'll speak about standards for asking questions in the next slide. For now, keep in mind the following guidelines for survey questions. You can ask open-ended questions, which allow for a free response, or you can use closed questions, which require the participant to select one of a range of fixed responses. The preferred format for responses to closed questions is the Likert scale. Likert scales allow the individual to provide an easily recordable response that's also more detailed and accurate than a simple yes or no response. Imagine being asked a question like, how do you feel this class has prepared you to craft an argument? And your choices were yes or no. If you had a Likert scale, you could rephrase the question into a statement. Rate how strongly you feel this class has prepared you to craft an argument. A Likert scale response could be numerical, like 1 being not prepared at all, to 5 being something like, I'm ready to be captain of the debate team. Or the responses could appear as phrases, strongly disagree to strongly agree. You get the idea. Likert scales are useful because they allow for some degree of response that better represents how the survey participant feels. Yes/no closed questions should be used sparingly. I'd recommend using them to limit your survey participant pool, especially if you're unfamiliar with the participants. For instance, are you over 21 or do you shop at farmers markets? Answers to these yes/no closed questions let you know who you're dealing with. Then you know how to proceed with interpreting the value of the rest of that participant's responses. Take a look at this slide for a few do's and don'ts. You should know that while these are guidelines for asking research questions in general, these are standards I'll be using to assess the questions you include in your prospectus. The one kind of question I'll elaborate on is the double-barreled question. These kinds of questions are problematic because they trap the participant into taking an assumption for granted. Consider if you participated in a research study about the ethics of being a student and plagiarism. What if the interviewer asked you the following question? Does your professor know you've plagiarized an assignment before? There are two questions here, and they're contingent. That is, the follow-up is related to a certain response to the first question. The primary question is, have you plagiarized an assignment before? Follow-up question, if the participant responds yes, is, does your professor know you've plagiarized before? Not only can these double-barrel questions be confusing, but they can also disrupt the sense of safety that's so crucial to nurture with the participant. Do you remember any required trips to a mission, farm, or any other place when you were in school? Those trips were meant to put you in direct contact with the subject you were learning about in your classes, whether they were history, science, or social studies. Indeed, they were primary research excursions, usually called field trips. An observational report works just like a field trip. You go out into the field, the place or space of your research subject, and you take notes or write a report. When doing this method of primary research, it's best to take two kinds of notes: fact-based observations and interpretations. Observations are objective, object-focused, and interpretations are subjective. That is, they are focused on how you, the note-taking subject, feel about the objects around you. When Ron Finley opened his TED Talk with pictures of South Central, with accompanying commentary, he was providing a field report. Not only do this field report add ethos, his credibility as a researcher, because you know he's very familiar with the research topic, he's been there, but also they allow the audience who may not know what the field looks like to get a clear sense of it with actual pictures or mental ones. The final primary research method involves collecting texts. Texts are anything you can read. And by read, I mean anything you can interpret. So really, that means that lots of things can be texts, not just written materials like documents or novels. Text can be visual, like a painting, a photograph, or a movie. But text can also be physical, like the design of a space or place. For instance, the layout of a farmer's market or a classroom could be a text. Even a digital space such as a website, a tweet, an Instagram account, or Facebook page. Texts are necessary because they help our audience see the phenomena that we're researching in their everyday world. Texts make the research topic real. We need to collect these everyday objects that everyone can see and read them. That is, analyze them in a way that the audience has not thought about them before. To review, primary research is done firsthand by the researcher. There are 4 methods we've discussed in this presentation. When determining which one to use, consider which will help you support your point. Having an informal outline structured first is probably best before you begin gathering primary sources. The outline will list the points that you need to make. Reflect on those points and determine what primary research needs to be done to support those points most effectively.